Scammers are some of the most effective psychologists on the planet. I'm going to say that right up front. And here's what I want us to think about it. Because the very tactics that make a scam dangerous could also help you and I become better leaders. And it's not necessarily the idea of using manipulation, but it's about what if we could actually learn to design better cultures, design better organizations. And so this isn't about, anything else but understanding design, right? And so I've been studying scams and why they work, and we're going to actually talk about some of that today. And what I also want to do is just help you understand broken cultures who have a high turnover often aren't necessarily people problems. They're just system design problems. And so we're going to look at scams. We're going to look at the psychology of it. We're going to cover a lot of ground today. And I'm going to show you how the scam psychology can often not only help you be a better leader, but it's going to help you build stronger teams and improve your operations inside out. So if you've ever been the person who's ever said, listen, I don't know why my team won't follow this process, I promise you, this one is for you. All right. So let's go ahead and dive in. We're going to go ahead and get started. And here's what I want to do. I want to first kind of start with understanding, first of all, why do scams work in the first place? Like, if you really think about it, and the reason why I went down this path is because I almost fell for a scam. And it was so well done, it got me to thinking about it. And I went down this rabbit hole and I found this chock full of great information. And I'm like, I got to share it with my leaders here. So listen, let's first start with why scams work. I'm gonna walk you through about 4 or 5 things that I've pulled out to really understand why a scam actually works. And the first one that we're going to talk about is they work because of emotional hijacking. Now, some of you may or may not know what that is, but I just want you to think about it for a second. It's because they use a particular trigger that elicits a response. So they use fear, they use greed, they use a sense of urgency, they use rewarding, right? So if you've ever read an email and maybe it gave you a little bit of information, or you saw a pop-up that said your account has been locked, click here, right? What they're actually tapping into, and yes, this is a little heady, but it's in your head, it's your amygdala, right? And so what they understand is, if I use emotional hijacking, what am I doing? I know that emotions are going to override logic every single time. Every time. And so this is a really important point to understand. Why in the world does a scheme actually work? And the better we understand that, and just understanding, well, what they're actually using is just emotional hijacking, right? And so what that then leads you to is understanding kind of the second thing that they do in order to make their scam more effective. What they actually do is they leverage authority bias, right? You've seen the spam calls. You've answered a couple of them before, right? There's really nobody on the other line until you say hello, and then you hear that pop and it says, hey, this is the IRS. Or there's been other ones that say, this is the CEO, right? They're leveraging authority in an email, in a text even. I mean, I've seen some of these text scams. Have you gotten any of these text scams that are out there? They're pretty wild, and I constantly see them all the time. And what I don't understand is like some of them are terrible, but then some of them are really, really good, right? But what they're using is authority bias. Now, I actually ran across a study that was mind-blowing around this, and I'm going to share that study at the end, but it's called the Milgram's Experiments, that prove by design of the study, and the conclusion was we default to authority even if it's painful. I'll walk you through that in a moment, but I want to get through why scams actually work, okay? So they use emotional hijacking. They use authority bias. The third thing that they use is they use scarcity and urgency, right? You see if they tell you, hey, your account's locked. If you don't act now, you're going to lose your access. Or you see an email that, they leverage the kind of the similar stuff, and then you mess around and click on it and you find out, oh, it's just this scam thing. But what they're really after is what we all know, which is called FOMO, fear of missing out. What's happening is again, because they attach themselves to your amygdala and they emotionally hijacked you, and they might send you down a path of authority bias. They say something in the email or the text or the phone call that makes it sound like they are in a position to, right? A fake debt collector or whatever the case may be, right? But that's the reason why they work. And so this scarcity thing is, you got to act now, otherwise you lose your access. If you don't pay today, we're going to, freeze all of your, whatever they say. But they're using scarcity and they're using urgency. Now, this next one is pretty interesting. This next one that I found was one that really almost got me, which is trust transfer. So trust transfer works a little bit like this. And tell me if you've run into this. Trust transfer is, you're reading an email. You notice the logo, it looks familiar. You might have even noticed the name in the subject line or in the email. The name looks familiar. And you click on it, and there's kind of some visual triggers that give your brain the shortcut to want to immediately trust it. So they say they're Facebook emailing you about your account. But if you actually look at the logo, it's a little off. It's not the actual logo. If you look at the email, it's this long string of letters and a fake name. But the first part said Susan. And maybe you know a Susan from Facebook, right? But the point is, they're using trust transfer in order to get you and I to move. And this was the one that almost got me, because they used a familiar name in an email of a person that I actually know. And so what your brain is doing is, your brain is always looking for a reason to trust. Your brain is not wired to spend all day in skepticism, right? So when we're scanning emails, and when we're looking at a text message, or when we're on a phone call, all our brain is really trying to do is figure out, what's the reason for me to listen? What do I need to do? And what's the next step I need to take, right? And then this next one that is really important is, they also get you, and the reason why these scams actually work is because of micro commitments. Just micro commitments. Now, some of you might be sitting here right now going, Chris, I have done all of these or been a part of all of these, and they weren't actually scams. You're right. Because what I want you to understand is, in a micro commitment, it's small things that basically is getting your brain to actually say yes. So you're using different words, they're using different language, but what they're doing is they're getting your brain to say yes. Let me give you an example. If you're on a phone call and they say, hey, your account is locked up, or we're calling to verify this account belongs to you, what we need to do is verify your address. I need to verify your address. When they called, they used a similar name. They told you they were from a similar company. And so all it's doing is they're getting through all of your filters, and now they're asking you for a micro commitment. Could you just verify your address for me, please? Now you done gave them your physical address, which, by the way, this is how they get a lot of senior citizens. Because senior citizens like being on the phone and talking to people. They enjoy a phone call from every now and then. And all of a sudden, there's somebody who sounds like they're in authority from a reputable company asking for information, and they just want you to verify your address. This is why scams actually work, right? So they go from like the small ask, verify your address, to something a little bit more. Can you give us, I just want to make sure this is your Facebook account, right? And then eventually they get to the bigger ones. Once they've gotten you all the way in and they've kind of reeled you all the way in, they'll ask you about your bank account number, your routing number. And we think, why would somebody fall for that? Because of trust transfer. because of making something sound like something that you would actually do, right? They're actually studying how real companies are calling. Think about that for a second. So trust transfer is huge. In fact, I found this stat out, and this was mind blowing to me. Is that what was it? I think it was last year alone. Scams cost Americans over $10 billion. You know the crazy part about that is? Most of those scams were triggered by just one click. Just one. Which meant everything you visually saw, everything that you heard on the call, everything that was in the email, everything that the colors and everything was designed in such a way to get you to trust and believe right up front before the first click. $10 billion, y'all. $10 billion. Now, I actually want to walk you through, I mentioned earlier this Milgram's experiment on authority bias, right? Now, this was a fascinating, like, to me, fascinating piece. And again, today we're talking about how in the world can you leverage what scam psychology does inside of your business. But we got to first understand how scams work. We have to understand the building blocks. So we've covered, why they work in the first place. Emotional hijacking, authority bias, scarcity and urgency, trust transfer, micro commitments. Let me walk you through this very interesting study that was done at Yale University in the 1960s. And this was a fascinating experiment because in this experiment, they decided, this was done in a Yale basement, by the way. What they were trying to figure out was obedience to authority. What would humans actually do given whatever the circumstances is or, where they need to be, right? So here was kind of the setup. And I want to share this with you guys. Participants were told that they were part of a study on learning and memory. They believed they were randomly assigned to the role of a teacher, while the other person, who typically was an actor, was the learner. The teacher was instructed to administer electric shocks to the learner whenever they gave a wrong answer. Now, the shocks would increase intensity with each wrong answer from like 15 volts to, get this, 450 volts. The learner was in a separate room, and although there were no real shocks actually given, the actor pretended to be like he or she was like in increasing pain as the shocks were coming through. And eventually they would like really act it out, like banging on the wall, going silent, screaming for people to stop, all these different things. And so what they really were after was this. They wanted to see how far ordinary people would go in obeying authority figure, even if it meant harming somebody else. This was done in the 60s, right? So I want to kind of walk you through what some of the results were, but I also want you to understand why this matters. And then we're going to get into, I'm going to walk you through some principles from this study, but then we're actually going to get into, well, how can I actually leverage this as a leader today in my business, in my company, as an executive? I'm going to walk you through that. But let's talk about some of the results. Check this out. 65% of the participants continued to maximum shock level of 450 volts, despite the learner showing signs of stress, hesitation, or discomfort. Just keep that in the back of your mind. Think about that for a second. 65%. They knew the person was suffering. They kept going, right? Most people in the study obeyed the authority figure, and basically that person wore a lab coat, right, to make it look like they were in authority. And the experiment required that you were to continue. So when you came in and if you played the teacher, you were required to continue with the experiment all the way through. So the real study was on the person playing the teacher, not the actor playing the learner. I hope that's making sense. Now, I want us to think about this for a second. Why would this matter? Why would running this study matter? What does this have to do with scams, and how do you leverage this as a leader? Because what it showed was everyday people can and will commit harmful acts when instructed by someone in authority, especially if they're in a structured system. And what the study did was it raised some real deep ethical questions. I mean, one's around power, one's around morality, one's around personal responsibility. Okay? And so, how do we connect this study, the Milgram study done at Yale University in the 60s, to leadership and how we lead and in some ways govern our people and our teams and our organizations and our companies today? It's because there's like 4 or 5 things that I realized with this particular study. Number one, there are a lot of blind obedience in bureaucracies. Just blind. And it's not because people want to be blind. There's some actual underlying things just under the surface that are driving people to just put on their blinders and just do, right? There's some leadership influence in that. There's also ethical decision-making under pressure. And there's also a little bit of what we would consider cultural design and some psychological safety. So when you look at blind obedience in bureaucracies, when you look at how leadership influence can play a part, the decision-making under pressure and psychological safety, you can start to use this study to help us do better as leaders under pressure, to do better with the way our teams are structured, our organizations are structured. Doesn't matter whether you're a CEO or you're a frontline manager. You have a real impact on the people that are executing the work every single day. So let's talk about some of the hidden leadership lessons that I pulled when I read this study, and I want to make sure that we all get an opportunity to really to follow, to just be aware, right? And then I'm gonna actually give you some practical things and steps that you and I should be aware of as we are leading our team. So the first one that I want to share is, let me share this with you because I think this is really important. The first one is, from Milgram's experiment, this is what I took away. Number one, people obey structures more than intentions. It doesn't matter if somebody comes in day one. If somebody is told, this is the structure, this is how we do work here, this is the hierarchy, this is the pyramid, this is the way we do things, what would that look like? That kind of looks like when we tell people, well, you know, this level people only talk to this level people. You don't go talk to their boss or this person's boss. Oh, if that person comes in the room, all of your stuff better be right. It's all of these little things. We will all obey structure more than our intentions. One, most intentions aren't even communicated properly, right? So we have to be mindful that from this experiment, this study, it taught us a few things. That this is a hidden danger in not designing culture and your teams well. And it could be happening right now. And I'm gonna give you a couple of things to go do to try to uncover some of this so that you can win. You can win the day, you can win the week, you can win the quarter, you can win the year. But I think it's really important. If your operational systems reward compliance over critical thinking, you're creating a culture of obedience, not necessarily ownership. So we got to be really careful on what is it that people are actually, following when it comes to the way our organization is structured. Here's a good way to fix it if you're running into this problem. You got to build systems that encourage upward feedback, psychological safety, and decision making. But at every level, not just at the top of the organization. Because if you do it at every level, then people start to own what they're working on. Why? Because they were involved. Because they had a part to play in said design, right? So let's look at the second one here, because the second one also matters as well. From the study, basically what I was able to gain from it was, if you have unclear responsibility, you have moral blind spots. It's a fact. Because in the experiment, many of the participants justified their actions by saying, I was just doing what I was told. Think about that. So I was told, hey, every time this person gets it wrong, you need to reprimand them. Well, okay. And so you're just doing something because you were told, but because you don't ever stop and actually ask, is this the right thing to do or the right way to go about it? We just do things. Now, here's the scary part about that, because things roll downhill, right? And what that means is, if from the top you deal with people a certain way, and if you don't understand the impacts of it, 1 level, 2 level, 3 level, 4 levels down below you, and how somebody may take that one small thing and it becomes bigger down the line, you have to take control of that, and you have to own it, and you have to say, okay, either I got to do a better job of communicating this, or I got to do a better job of how I show up in my behaviors as a leader in my organization when things go wrong, right? Especially when you're in a fast-scaling company, unclear roles and poor documentation is going to lead to diffusion of responsibility, especially when it comes to your operations, your onboarding, and your management. And everybody's frustrated as a result, right? So how do we fix it? Well, what we got to do is we got to have clear SOPs and some accountability frameworks so that we can reduce the risk of people doing harm without understanding the impact. Because one of the things I have realized very early on, just because somebody is good at their job doesn't mean they're actually good with people. And because they might not be good with people, but they're actually good at their job, we will promote somebody for being good at their job, but their behavior does not allow for people to work under them. And so the people that work under them or work alongside them, dotted line, sideline, pick your line, right? They are suffering because we're promoting. When we promote somebody, you're not just promoting the person, you're also promoting the behavior of that person. And so the behaviors of that person speak louder than the email that said, hey, such and such is moving from, director to, executive. Well, everybody knows that person's behavior. So we just got to be mindful of that, right? The next one, I got a lot of content, so I want to make sure that I get through all of this, okay? The third one from this experiment that really stood out to me was authority without empathy is going to create fear-based cultures. This is why development internally is so much more important than trying to find a rock star based on a job description. Because just like a sports team, you can move a bunch of, players around and hoping that you get a good mix of these top level players. But one of the best things that we've seen, especially in the NBA, because you guys know I love the NBA, development matters. Development can actually win you championships. So do you want a championship team? Then what we've got to learn to do is we got to invest in the development structure of our organization. Because one of the things that this experiment, Milgram's experiment, has shown was that just because the teacher wore a lab coat and was calm and used some rational phrases every now and then, most people just obeyed because they saw a lab coat, because they saw somebody in authority. Not because the person was intentionally cruel, but it's just because the system that the person worked in felt official. That's the only reason why. And so here's kind of the way I look at it, for us as leaders. A cold system that looks professional but is actually ignoring the human experience is always going to lead to disengagement, burnout, and resentment. I'll state that again. A cold system that looks professional but ignores the human experience is going to lead to disengagement, resentment, and burnout. Every time. Because it's one thing to blame, the person. It's another thing to blame the tool. It's another thing to say, we had these, budget cuts and all these circumstances. Okay, I get it. But what we have to look at is the system itself. Is it designed for the human experience to thrive? Or is it designed robotically because of what we think somebody should be doing? Humans are not widgets. Humans are not output tools. We are complex systems that are working within a system, within a structure, right? A civilized structure. So what we have to learn to do is get back to the root of understanding human design and elements that allow for the human to thrive, even if it's a tough work culture. There are some people and some companies that even though the work culture is difficult and tight deadlines, and there's always, they love it. They thrive in it. Not because of the work is terrible and hard, but because they like the way they get treated and the way they get handled in the work, in the pressure, when things go wrong. So that's why they love it, right? So here's the fix. What we got to learn to do is balance authority with humanity. That's really what we got to start doing. We got to use rituals of empathy. What does that look like? Check-ins, some storytelling. What I like to call what we got wrong reviews. Let me tell you something. If you want to do reverse psychology on any organization, you as the leader start putting out what we got wrong reviews. What does it do? It takes away the excuse of anybody else under you for not wanting to be transparent and show some humility, but also saying, here's what we learned as a result of getting it wrong, and here's what we're going to do going forward. If you as the leader started putting out once a quarter or once every month what we got wrong, everybody will fall in line. People will start to feel comfortable going, well, maybe I can say, hey, this didn't work out. And not feel like in a cold system, I have to be perfect all day, every day. And if I get one thing wrong, I'm out of here. See, that's the difference. All right, let's move to number 4. Because number 4 is also interesting as well, is that good people, this was a shocker to me, but good people can still do harm in broken systems. Listen, good people can still do harm in a broken system. The Milgram's experiments participants, they were not evil people. They were normal people, but they were put in an abnormal system. Remember, they walk into a room. They are the teacher. They are given a lab coat, and they are told every time that person on the other side of this wall gets their answer wrong, hit them with a shock. Now, outside looking in, you're like, why would I do that? We do this every day, though, to people when we walk into the office. We do this every day when we have good intentions, but we're not looking at the execution of those intentions. We're not even asking, how is this impacting people as a result of this decision, this change in tool, this change in the process, this change in our behavior, this change in language? We got to ask the hard questions. Don't assume your team's behavior is about character. Oftentimes, it's the systems that they're inside that is shaping their decisions. Here's a good example. I used to see this a lot in a particular division I was working with, as we were transforming. We did as a part of a corporate strategy project I was on. This was like a 2-year project, and we were uplifting and we were doing a reorg, a tech migration, organization just changed, like process improvements. This was a 2.5-year project we worked on. And one of the things that I noticed all the time was that when it turned 4:30 on the dot or 5 o'clock, people got out of there so fast and made your head spin. I noticed that people would not show up to the job until they absolutely had to. I noticed that people did not actually talk to each other unless it was work related. I noticed that people were sitting in their cubes siloed, no conversation or communication. And it made me start asking the question, what is the reason? Well, when I got down to the bottom of it, you know what it was? People said, nobody's listening to our suggestions. So they keep telling us to do more work and piling on more stuff. And now I went from wearing 3 hats, to wearing 9 hats, but I'm asked to still produce more. They say they want our feedback, but then when we give them our feedback, we never hear back from them, right? So what is happening? People are just disengaging. I'm just going to put my head down. I'm going to do my job, and that's it. I'm not going to offer no suggestions anymore. I'm not going to offer ways to change something. In fact, I'm not even going to think about something better or something to make this situation better. I'm just going to do my job and get out of here. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a terrible environment, but it's happening all the time. And so what do we have to fix in order to be able to make it better? Well, when the performance drops, well, here's what we got to start asking, because that's the big thing that happens. The performance just automatically drops. The performance of the team, the deliverables, the quality, things start to go down. And we got to ask ourselves the tough questions. Is this a people problem or a system design flaw that we need to fix? And I'm going to ask you and I, assume it's a system design flaw first. Just assume that first, okay? Just assume that first. Now, the last one is pretty interesting, which is that the best cultures actually invite disobedience. This is what it kind of taught me going through this experiment. Yeah, I just want you to think about it for a second. The best cultures invite some form of disobedience. Because what the study showed me was that most people are going to obey unless they are given permission to push back. Do you give your leaders permission to push back on your decisions? Is it okay that somebody can question you in a meeting? Is it all right if somebody can pull you to the side after a meeting and say, hey, actually, I was thinking this? Do people actually come to you with contrarian thinking based on what needs to get done and the timeline and what actually can get done? Do you invite that? These are things that need to happen, because if your team never challenges the policy or the questions or questions a decision that gets made, that's not alignment. Can I tell you what it actually is? It's actually risk. It's a risk because it means there's no innovation, there's no intentionality, there's no challenge, and so you're inherently inviting risk of being irrelevant long term. But you also risk in disengagement. You also risk institutional knowledge walking out the door, because they will go somewhere else where they can challenge. That's the world we live in nowadays, right? So what's the fix? Well, we got to actively reward constructive feedback. Part of the reason why we need to do feedback loops that are effective in operations is so that the people who are actually doing the work, can flag system breakdowns, and they can do it in a way that's safe for them. Because most people, the first question they're asking is, if I bring this up, am I going to get in trouble? Am I going to be ostracized? Are they going to stop handing me work? Are they going to stop letting me into the rooms? Are they going to stop inviting me because I bring up certain problems? So this experiment, these 5 things were fascinating to me, and it was an eye opener on this experiment. Now, let's get down to business. All right, I gave you the background on why scams work. You understand from my perspective what I learned from this experiment done at Yale University in the 60s. Here's kind of my final thought on that experiment. His experiment proved that obedience is just a default, but it's not a virtue. Okay? It's not. It's not really a virtue. And great leaders do an extremely tough job of designing cultures so that people obey their values and not just their bosses. And no different than a garden, you can't blame the flowers, the fruit, the plant for not growing if you don't take care of the soil and the soil is malnourished. All right? So let's dive into this last part. All right? Now, this last part, here's what I want to do. I want to give us something, right? I want us to walk away with some ethical tactics that we should all be stealing as leaders when it comes to, learning from these scams and why they work and different things that we could do in order to be able to make it so that we can actually grow, right? So I'm going to give you 5 different tactics, okay? Just 5 tactics to wrap this up to be able to use right now, today, inside of your company as a leader in order that you can start to flip the script on your culture, on your team engagement, on the way things work. All right, now here's the first one. The first one is we got to start using emotion to drive momentum. Remember, I taught you about the amygdala, right? Emotion overrides logic every time, if touched right. Okay? How do we know that? We fall in love, and we will do some things for love for our spouse, my wife. Oh my God. Yeah. Crazy stuff, right? Because emotion overrides logic every day, right? So what we got to understand is that scams use fear, but leaders, we use vision and meaning. Can you tell the story and tell it often and tell it in multiple different ways of why the work is important right now? Are you doing that? Are you being creative with that? Are you allowing other people to tell the story? Because storytelling is a strategy. I heard from a leader one time, and he said that the mission has to be big enough that other people can see themselves in it. Do your people see themselves in the mission? Have they heard it? When is the last time you told the story? How do they know? Because if you're having high turnover, the story walked out with the last 60% of people. So the new people have no clue about the story, right? We have to launch initiatives with emotional resonance and not just the metrics. Guys, when we do these initiatives, and I like kickoffs. I think they're cool. But I'm going to be honest with you. A lot of them are boring because there's no thought into them. It's, well, here's the metrics. Here's what we're going to hit. And here's what we're going to do. Woohoo. Let's go get them, team. No. You need storytelling. You know the reason why you buy products? Because all commercials now are not about the product. It's the story they tell about the product. That's why you buy something. So what we got to learn to do is go, okay, I know we need to start this initiative, but what's the story that we need to tell about the initiative to get people to care, right? We got to build rituals in the recognizing the process. We don't rise to the level of our goals. We fall to the level of our systems. But people follow systems they feel connected to. So help people connect, okay? There's an interesting stat. Highly engaged teams are 23% more profitable according to a Gallup poll. So if you want to be 23% more profitable, I think we need to try to focus on that. All right. The next one. This tactic is pretty cool. So I talked about the trust transfer earlier was the one that I almost fell for, right? But we got to do trust transfer as a leader that's real. Scammers will fake it. The cool part is, as a leader, we get to build it, and it's tangible and it's real. The culture actually is going to live or die on the consistency of a leader's behavior. And so if we are displaying behaviors and being intentional, I've followed Gary Vee for years now. And one of the most interesting things that you hear is how stalkish he almost is of his people, and how intentional he forces people to be about the people that work there. He often says, he works for his people, not the other way around. You see, my tagline is, I'm the leader behind the people, because I truly believe if you put people in place and you give them what they need, they're not going nowhere. People just want to be seen, feel heard, and feel like their ideas matter. And they want to contribute. We all do, right? So we got to understand that. And so what could this look like? I wrote a couple of things down. Number one, we could do some weekly, what are we working on updates? Do a reverse Q&A, right? I mentioned the idea of where we went wrong reviews. You could do, hey, here's where we messed up, right? Just kind of some post-mortem stuff on some projects, or you guys tried something that didn't work out. The idea is that you gotta start getting people to care. And if you show that you're vulnerable and that you make mistakes and that you're trying to figure it out and you can tell the story, well, guess what? Your mid-level managers will start to trust and move forward. Because if they aren't aligned, then all the trust is going to break further downhill, right? So I mentioned this before, but it's just true. People don't quit jobs. People quit the chaos, the confusion, and the leadership inconsistencies every single day of the week. So we got to be mindful, all right? Tactic number 3 that we can leverage from scammers so we can be better at our business. Scarcity, but we got to do it with some purpose. See, scammers will fake the sense of urgency, but as a leader, here's how we can actually do it in an ethical way. We can start to incorporate time-bound challenges in in projects that we got going on. Have some fun with it. Gamify it, right? We can do learning sprints. We can say, hey, listen, for the next 6 weeks, we are taking every idea to include AI inside of our workflows. Bring us every idea. Here's the email address to send them to. If we like them, we're going to call you in and we want to hear all the stuff. And it's only for 6 weeks. Okay, cool. It's a learning sprint. It's getting people to engage in a different way. You might have a sales team or organization you love being in competition. So maybe you do some public competition scoreboards, right? Hey, the person that sells 10 of these is going to get a watch. This person that sells this of this is getting this. This person's getting 2 extra days of vacation, whatever, right? But the idea is you got to create a culture of momentum with short bursts of energy, because urgency doesn't need to be pressure, but you can make it purposeful, right? There's a stat that I saw that said companies with time-boxed initiatives see a 30% higher adoption of new tools or the SOPs. Intentional design inside of your organization works every single time. Let's move to number 4. All right. Number 4 is, I mentioned this word a moment ago, gamify. But this time, be specific in your gamifying. Gamify the feedback loop. Everybody's doing a survey poll, but do something fun. Be creative. In the comments, are you working in a company that did a really cool feedback loop? Share it down in the comments so other people get ideas. But think about it. Like, you could ask like a simple question. Hey, what's one system this month that if we fixed it would make your life better? And send it out and see what people say, right? But you got to do something with that information, right? You can't just ask people questions and then don't respond, because then they feel like it went into a black hole, right? But turn those insights into some valuable wins, right? Share those insights. Talk about them in the next leaders meeting. Encourage our leaders to go do the same with their people. You got to start building some co-ownership of the system. The system. I know this is your company. I know you run all of operations. I know you the VP. I get it. But you have to build co-ownership with your leaders, your managers, your frontline people, and the people who do the executing all day long. All right? If you do that, then people will start to see the impact. Because if they don't help build it, I promise you they will not help scale it. It's just the truth. Go look at anybody who's scaling their business. It ain't just one person. They got buy-in from a bunch of other people, and that's what's causing it to scale. Okay? This last one is really important. We have to start designing for human behavior. And I know I'm going to sound like a two-headed monster, but we can't design for human behavior and design for all of AI. Listen, this happens all the time. We contract and expand when things happen. I've seen this forever, but I get it. AI is awesome. And yes, the tools are great and they should impact our business and they should make us better. Not at the expense of understanding human behavior. Because human behavior is still here. You can't get around it. You can't AI your way out of dealing with human behavior. Okay? So we can't, there's some things that go on right inside of an organization. We just don't expect people to fight certain things that are just going to happen. You can't expect everybody to fight burnout, distraction, or confusion. That's going to happen. But you can design around it. You can start to design a culture and an infrastructure and an organization that goes, we know those things are going to happen, but how do we start to design around it? We got to start having options. We got to start having templates. We got to start having ways that we are basically reducing the decision fatigue for people. Because one of the things I see all the time is that when people don't know what to do, either they do nothing or they run. Very few are going to run into the fire and get burned. So we've got to start just making it easy for people to make decisions. And here's the other thing that we need to do. We got to celebrate clarity, not the compliance of a thing. See, when we promote somebody or we highlight somebody, you got to ask yourself, before I press send on this email or I mention this person in the meeting, in the all hands call, am I celebrating the compliance to what we told them to do? Or are we celebrating the clarity of by which they worked and what they were able to accomplish? Sometimes we just got to take a pause and just ask, right? So listen, those are the 5 tactics that I think are really important. I hope you found this information helpful. Again, I'm Chris Williams. I'm your leader behind the people. If you need my help, shoot me a DM. We can have a conversation. I love being able to help companies and cultures design in a way that they can actually thrive. I'll leave you with this. You got to start thinking system versus the people. You got to start realizing that most cultures' problems aren't personality issues, they're system issues. Anytime you start to keep hearing a constant issue, think system first. Don't blame the person. Even if the person is very difficult, they might be difficult for a reason. Because it might be the system in which they're working in. If your team is disengaged, it's not because they're lazy. It's not. It's because the system that they're inside doesn't reward what actually matters. So let's design a system that reward what actually matters. And you might be going, well, I know what matters. These things, these 4 or 5 things matter. Does it matter to them? That's the question we got to ask ourselves. It's not that what you probably have on paper is not important. Does it matter to them? Has it been clearly communicated that it should matter to them? Why should they care? And yes, that's got to be something that you got to drill and constantly talk about over and over and over again. So here's my challenge to everyone. Where you could redesign one system this week that's going to improve clarity, improve the trust, or improve the engagement, do it. Don't think about it. Don't try to come up with a committee and spend 9 weeks. No, just do it. Just actually get it done. And let's see what happens. If you want an audit or you want some internal system conversations around behavioral design, listen, give me a shout. Let me know. I hope this was helpful. If this was, share this video with somebody else today. I taught you so much about scams and why they work. Milgram's experiment and some 5 things that you can do tactically in order to be able to work. Listen, I love talking about systems. I love organizational design. I hope this was helpful. Have a great, incredible day. And just remember that growth without systems is just chaos with good branding. Catch y'all later. Peace.